Okay, I'm doing this kind of off the cuff. I wasn't even. I had an idea for a video. I scrapped it. I thought it was too weak. I thought it would never really. I thought it would peter out. I thought the relevance would just disappear without a trace within a few days. I thought it wouldn't make any sense to do. It would just be me being pedantic or annoying or whatever. And I'm not saying I'm not saying that this is going to be viral, but I need to get this out of my system um, because I just oh boy. So Tenet just recently released on. I was about to say DVD, but that's because I'm fucking old. I guess streaming service, Blu-ray or whatever. Um, and this is not a rave about Christopher Nolan is a genius or anything. Don't worry, I have my opinions about him. I think Tenet was a nice movie. I thought it was entertaining. I thought it had its flaws. Uh, but I'm not going to rave about oh it's so great and people who think it's bad are stupid. No, um, this is kind of tangential to that. It's kind of related to it, but no, this is not about anybody's opinion of the movie. This is about people saying that it is difficult to understand. Those who dislike it, or dislike the difficulty as they call it convoluted and of its own certain body part. Oh, fuck it, I'm already swearing. Up its own ass. If anyone is in doubt, I'm talking to YouTube. No, this video is not meant for children. Stop asking me. I'm not making goddamn toy reviews. So it's not meant for children. But people, we need to talk about. I'm not even going to say intelligent movies because to kind of point the same finger at the positive crowd. No, this movie isn't brilliant. This isn't some kind of genius example of wildly complex imagination. It's well thought out, in my opinion, but very little is new in this. It's just made on a bigger budget, made by a guy who has the balls to actually do something interesting, which is a totally different topic that I'm not going to go into here. But no, it's not new or groundbreaking or anything, and we'll get into that a bit. I'm trying to write a story. I've been writing stories for a long time, but most of them have just been like for myself. When I was a kid, I wrote school plays and stuff like that. And I do some ghost writing, which can be profitable if you know what you're doing. I barely do, but I'm trying to write a comprehensive story that involves time travel. So I may be biased. I have an interest in time travel. I have read about time travel, both the fictional sources and as much as there is scientific study into it. So yeah, I may be biased, but stop calling Christopher Nolan's movie Tenet confusing, obtuse, convoluted, or brilliantly complicated and genius anything. Just stop. It's a fairly simple movie. It's a fairly simple story. Few parts of it has been taken to a couple of extremes. But stop pretending that this is quantum physics. I know quantum physics. This is not quantum physics. So let's kind of take a step back. As I said, I'm doing I'm doing this off the cuff. I have no script. I'm basically running on adrenaline and well, two drinks I just had. I'm sitting here in my sofa, not even in any kind of studio. I'm just speaking to the computer. I'm recording this directly on my laptop, so I'm sorry if it doesn't live up to audio standards, but whatever. There's no script here. This is not meant to be a big discussion, but let's nonetheless try to kind of cut this into tiny little pieces and spoon feed it to ourselves, which sounds really weird. English is not my native language, and I want to use a phrase that doesn't work in English. But let's just take this one little step at a time. Let's start. I'm assuming here that you've seen the movie Tenet. If you have not seen the movie Tenet, watch it, have an opinion about it, whatever. Watch it, come back to this, or don't. I don't expect this to blow up at all. I just need to get this off my chest so we can get back to doing other meaningless projects that nobody cares about, and I'm fine with that. Ah! So let's take a look at Tenet without talking about the time travel stuff. It's a fairly simple, almost banal spy movie. Well, bit spy, bit heist movie, but spy movies can kind of go in a couple of odd directions. I'm not going to go into that here now either. But, yes, it's about a guy who is recruited through a kind of rough method into an organization which is trying to hunt down pieces of what we will for now call a doomsday weapon. There is a Russian lunatic, billionaire, or millionaire, or whatever, rich guy who wants to collect the pieces of this doomsday device, and he needs to be stopped. And to do that, the protagonist, who is laughably called the protagonist, that one I have no excuse for. That's just weird, but what the hell? Doesn't affect the plot really. But the protagonist has to kind of find a way to get to this guy, and that goes through the guy's wife. That's very old school spy movie. And how does he get through that? Well, the wife hates the guy because the guy is a raving lunatic with a very strong violent streak, and either he tricked her into it or she made a mistake and he made use of it. But whatever the case is, she has based her entire life and career around appraising art, or validating art, making sure that art is not a forgery. And one guy who she knew, who she might have been in cahoots with, or who might have abused her trust, had her authenticate a piece of art that was a forgery, and she said that it was real. Meaning that if that gets out to the world, she's screwed. And her abusive husband has bought this piece of art and is now basically threatening her, if you don't do as I say, I expose you to the world and your life will be over. So in order to get to the lunatic guy, they go through the wife by promising her to destroy the evidence of her mistake / fraud that he has control of. Simple enough. And now for the doomsday device. So in the future, somebody figures out how to make objects function in reverse. Like time, reverse time. If you fire a gun, the bullet will not leave the barrel in the same way of time that we normally perceive it to. The bullet will be fired back in time, which means that because we see time going forwards, anything that happens in reverse will look like it's going backwards. So if you have a gun and you fire it and it fires the bullet into the past, what you will see is the bullet going back into the gun. Now this is I'm trying to find a better word for it, but this is a fun little gimmick. But it's not brilliant. When there was this discussion before Tenet even came out, whether it would be in the same universe or even a spiritual or direct sequel to Inception. Of course, it wouldn't be a direct sequel, apart from the Batman movies. Nolan doesn't do sequels, apparently. I may sound spiteful about this. I'm not. The man does what he does. I generally like his movies. Not up to me to decide, but he typically does not do sequels. But that could still mean it was a spiritual sequel to Inception. But somewhere on the vastness of the internet, probably a YouTube video, I left a comment before it was even out saying no, it's quite obvious. Tenet is not a spiritual sequel to Inception. It is a spiritual sequel to Primer. Now, if you don't know Primer, I'm not going to hold this against you, because for most people, Primer went completely under the radar. It was, as far as I know, a completely indie movie made on a very small budget. It's about two guys who invent, or a couple of guys, mainly two guys, who invent a time machine. And they get up to a lot of shenanigans about it. Now, let's take the basics of time travel. Time travel forward in time, we don't care. Not right now. It's related, but it's a bit different. There are other things you have to worry about, but the big kahuna here is time travel back in time. So if you go back in time, what effect does that have on the world? And of course, nobody knows, because it's not something we really do. Or as far as we know, it's not something we really do. Which makes... I was actually going to start with this, but I wanted to show off these reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, which said, oh, it was horribly convoluted or complicated, or someone said, or was it semi-confusing or something? I'm putting the image up. But one, and I use this term only in the technical meaning of it, one movie reviewer actually used the phrase, I'm going to look this up because I got the image right here somewhere, because this is just stupidity beyond stupidity. He used the phrase, he doesn't even do the time travel right. Now, this might mean that some of the time travel doesn't make sense under its own rules, but just reading the sentence by itself makes my head hurt. There is no doing time travel right. We don't do time travel. It is not a real thing, you. Oh! Time travel can be a ton of different things. Time plasticity. You have the butterfly effect, both the concept and the movies, where if you go back 50 minutes, you change the entire world because the butterfly effect, the name comes from some guy who said if a butterfly flaps its wings in Tokyo, there will be a storm in New York. Or something like it. Yes, I'm going to keep in the cough. I'm doing this off the cuff, and I'm doing this with the cough. There is no doing time travel right. It's a creative concept. It's like saying you don't do aliens right. What right? But back on track. The idea that fascinates a lot of people about time travel is, can you alter the past? And there are many different versions of it. I'm going to, if I remember it, I will list a couple of interesting and easy to absorb YouTube videos that go into the into the concept more. But in essence, you have, on one extreme, you have the no, time is fixed. You go back in time and time will not change. If you try to change it, something will prevent you, or you will simply just disappear, and maybe disappear forever, maybe go back to where you left for the time travel, so on. And then you have, on the other end, you have the butterfly effect. Or you go back, everything is changed, and you get a new world history, and what people tend to call a different timeline, or alternate timeline. And you know what? Go watch Back to the Future. The second movie explains it quite nicely. The one about changing the timeline. Now, what the movie Primer, adds to the mix is that rather than you just going into your DeLorean or police phone box or whatever you use as a time travel device, if you don't know what I'm talking about, those are just gimmicky visualizations of time machines from other movies, or a big cylindrical thingamajig from Terminator. Instead of just going into a time machine and going you're back to another point in time, Primer puts a tiny twist on it, that you go into a box, and instead of just going back to the point in time, you wait in the box, the time machine box, for as long as you want to go back in time. So if you wait 24 hours in the box, bring oxygen. But if you wait 24 hours in the box, then you go 24 hours back in time. So basically, you are going back in time at the same rate as time would usually move for you. Every second you stay is a second you go back. Time is going slowly backwards, or is going backwards at the normal rate of time. Now this is interesting concept, but it's not really that complex. Instead of just going back in time, you're going backwards in time. What Tenet does is that it basically does the same kind of time travel, except it opens the box. So imagine sitting, we'll take it step by step. Imagine sitting in a transparent box, looking out into the world as it goes the wrong way in time. Basically like putting a video on reverse. And the time moves backwards, and you will see things unfolding backwards. If you watch If there is a car crash, you'll see it unfold backwards. You'll see the crashed cars, and then you'll see them unfold from each other and become whole and go driving in reverse backwards in time. It's not that hard. Anyone who's screwed around with a video editor or has done weird things with old school movie equipment has probably experienced this. For an excellent use of it, watch Weird Al Yankovic's Amish Paradise music video. There was a phase where it was a really big deal about being able to do things in reverse and making them sound like they weren't. I think it was the 90s or the early 2000s. Hello. Hi, kitty. Hi. Hey, Snowflake. I don't have time for you right now. No. Sit down. Let Daddy work. Or let Colby's working more time. Yeah, hi. No. You can't use a computer. But yeah, that's the basic of it. And if someone out there in normal time was watching you through this transparent box, if you're doing anything, at least let's imagine that you're not playing with a yo-yo, because that would look the same, but let's imagine that you're lighting a cigarette, because you're not the healthy kind. I sympathize. Not a smoker, but I sympathize. They would see you at first sitting with a partially smoked cigarette in your mouth, and then the cigarette would unsmoke itself, and when the cigarette was completely unsmoked, you would have a flame to it, and the flame would heal it, like say. Or if you dropped a glass bottle inside, they would see the glass bottle reshape it, reassemble itself, and jump up in your hand. Whichever side you're on, you are going the opposite way in time, the opposite direction in time, and you're going to see the other one go backwards in time. Now, some people may already have a problem with that. But to call that complex, to call that confusing, is like saying that a language is very difficult because you don't speak it. It's not complex, you just don't think much about it. Watch a video or something in reverse, and that's basically, you basically have the concept. Now, where Tenet really puts an edge on it is when it says, no, there is no box. It doesn't say it entirely, there are limitations, but in essence, those going back in time and going forward in time can affect one another. So that's where we get things like the highway scene, or the car chase scene, where you suddenly have a car crashing on the same road, but in reverse time flow. And that looks cool and everything, and it's not something we're used to seeing in cars. In movies. We're not used to seeing it in cars either, but we're not used to seeing it in movies. So you can go, oh, that's weird, that's complex. But then again, no, it really isn't. You're watching something being reversed. It's not complex. Might be interesting, might be unusual, but it's not that complex. Stop crawling on Daddy, sweetheart. It's the cat. And then you have the whole throwing things back and forth between people. And yeah, if you really want to understand the details of it, it can be a bit cryptic. It's an interesting back and forth. But really, someone threw something that someone caught going in reverse. It's like catching a ball that you threw yourself, just went in reverse. it's not insanely complicated. If we go up to the bigger scale of the movie, that's when it starts trying to make it look complicated, but it's not complicated. Things happen in reverse, and some people get caught up in it, even though they are not in reverse. My favorite thing that I thought about when I started thinking about, not about the stuff for this video, but just about the overall physics of it, because the physics of Tenet don't hold up to in-depth scrutiny. The time travel has too many questions. There are too many things that wouldn't fit. I'm not going to go into them, but let's just say that if something was broken in reverse, then it would start out broken and would be fixed by the accident that broke it. And if you fix it or remove it or change it before that happens, then you screw up the whole reverse time flow. If you understood that, good. If you didn't understand that, fine. It's not something you need to understand the movie. It's not something you need to understand the concept. It's just when you think a lot about it. But one of the things that actually caught my eye when I rewatched the movie was there is a scene late in the movie where a building has been blown up in reverse, which means that someone watching the building be blown up in the normal direction of time would see the wall assemble itself again. There would be a dust cloud that would get sucked in, and the wall would assemble itself and then be whole. There's a building that gets blown up both the right way in time and in the reverse way in time. Very neat. But this particular explosion has the added detail of a guy running through it who is not in reverse. So what happens is the reverse explosion sucks the wall in, and when the guy runs through it, he gets sucked in along with it. Now, this looks a bit peculiar. It's very nicely filmed. It doesn't look peculiar because there's something wrong with it. It looks peculiar because the idea is interesting. From the perspective of someone standing near the explosion who was watching it in reverse, who was also experiencing time in reverse, they would see the explosion unfold normally. What they would also see is, as the explosion unfolds, a guy is formed out of the explosion and then starts to run away from it backwards. Coming to these conclusions isn't difficult. If you really want to do it, you can just watch the movie in reverse. But people seem to have a hard time grasping things that aren't entirely carbon copies of what they already know. And that is what boils my piss. Because if your complaint, or even if your opinion, mainly if it's your complaint about the movie, but even if it's your opinion that these things make the movie complex, then you are part of what is keeping movies from growing. Imagine if flat earthers were not considered complete idiots. I'm sorry, if you're a flat earther, I can consider you you can have a Nobel Prize in chemistry and be a renowned Harvard professor or whatever. I don't really put much stock in diplomas, but whatever. You can be considered a genius in every other way, but if you are a flat earther, I'm sorry, I consider you a moron. Not going to go into that, not going to debate it. Not going to debate it in the comments either. But imagine if the world was run by flat earthers. The idea of space travel would be considered insanely complex and impossible, near impossible to imagine. Because space travel, as we know it at least, is based around the world being a planet, globe. And you would have a hard time doing anything that had to do with space travel. I want to write about time travel. I want to explore weird concepts, and I know that in the past people have made fine careers or at least gotten some level of respect discussing complex topics. Isaac Asimov with robot psychology, Philip K. Dick's futuristic predictions. I don't know if they're predictions or imaginations. His futuristic imaginations. But if you perpetuate the myth, yes, myth, that a movie like Tenet is really difficult to understand, then you are holding back storytelling. If you feel that there is something difficult, if people tell you that there's something they don't understand, just explain it. Like I said, if you say that a language is difficult to understand just because you don't speak it, if you grew up only speaking English and someone started trying to explain to you how Japanese works, you'd say, oh my god, you might say, oh my god, that's a really complicated language, that makes absolutely no sense. And you would basically be throwing up roadblocks to understanding Japanese, and if you do it loud enough, you would make people shy away from learning Japanese. Because, oh my god, no, that's too much. I mentioned quantum physics earlier. The reason that it seems complex to me is probably because everybody seems to treat it as complex, including the ones who talk about it. I'm a teacher by profession. My job is to take seemingly complicated things and explain why they are not. And until you can accept, not understand, but accept that just because you don't understand a thing doesn't mean it's complex, you are holding back the ability of yourself and anyone who listens to you to understand this concept better. Tenet is a movie with an interesting time travel gimmick. People go forwards in time, then they get inversed, and then they go back in time. And this is already way longer than it was supposed to be. Maybe if people care, maybe I'll make another video trying to go through a couple of details on it. Maybe I'll go into some details on time travel and other media. It's not what my channel was meant to be for, but meant to be used for. Gotta take care not to use the word before when I'm talking about time travel. It's not what I meant to do, but if people care, and if it can make these things seem less, I'm tempted to say seem less Japanese, but that seems almost insulting. If it can make them seem less complex and confusing, then fine. I don't mind talking about it, I just feel like I'm kind of beating a dead horse. But this Tenet thing just got to me. Let's take one example. When you go into, I think it was called a turnstile, the machine that inverts in time. You go into a machine, and it does something to you, and when you step out of the machine, you're moving backwards in time. Now, from your perspective, You go into the machine and then you go out, and everything you see is what has already happened, and it's now happening in reverse. What happened right before you stepped into the machine happens at first. What happened longer before you stepped into the machine then happens later. And then you go back in time, until you get into a similar machine and get turned back the other way. Now, what someone outside sees, and this actually happens in a scene, what someone outside sees is one person going in the normal forward direction in time, and one person going in reverse in time. And those two persons at the same time enter the machine. And then they're gone. That is because when you go back in time, there is no you stepping out of the machine that's still going forward in time. It's like having a car that's driving along a road and then you make a U-turn and go back. If you have someone driving beside you, once you make that U-turn, they're not driving beside you anymore because they've just continued. And there's nobody besides them anymore because you turned around and went backwards. This is just the same thing in time. And I see how that can be hard to wrap your mind around if you're not entirely comfortable with thinking about time as something other than the immutable constant that we think of it as in our daily lives. But that does not mean it is complicated. It just means that someone needs to sit down and explain it to you. And I just did. And I hope you understand it. This is not a two-way communication. So if you didn't understand it, I don't know, post a comment, ask questions. I'd love to explain it. I don't mind explaining it. I don't mind it doing another video, even though this was not what the channel was for. You never know where you're going until you're there. Especially not in this information age. And especially not if you're trying to make YouTube videos. I didn't know I was going to pass the half-hour mark on this thing. And I think I'm speaking too fast for me to just speed up. Maybe I can play it in reverse. No, I'm not going to do that. You can do that if you want to. I'll upload a version that goes in reverse if you want to. It's just getting silly. But to just say, and I've said this to students about it, just throw up your hands and go, oh, this is confusing, this is weird, this is obtuse, this is beyond me. You're ruining it for everybody. No, you're ruining it for yourself if you make a video, especially if people actually watch that video in meaningful numbers. If a meaningful number of people watch that video, then you're ruining it for everybody. You're perpetuating a myth, and you're ruining it for everybody, because until people can accept that it's not too complicated, until people can accept that they can just ask questions or they can just think about it and maybe it makes sense, it becomes harder and harder to do movies that are not just carbon copies of concepts we already know. And this, just to throw in a tangent, is why I'm terrified for the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because they've figured out that if you just rehash basically the same story over and over again with new effects and little details tweaked, you've got a cash cow. People love repetition. I don't. With all due respect to the Teletubbies, I like new and more complicated things. I'm not talking about the Teletubbies as a show. I'm talking about Teletubbies, if you know them, they repeat things that they show on their bellies. The show itself, I love the weirdness, but I'm not into repeating things over and over and over again. I'm going to cut it here because I'm probably going to start repeating myself if I don't. But Tenet is not complicated. Stop saying it's complicated. If it feels complicated, explain it to people. If you can't explain it, figure it out, or just accept it the way it is. Please. And let's get something new and exciting the next time from Nolan or others. Thank you.